Epiphany can literally be translated from the Greek as manifestation. In religious terms, it designates the manifestation of the divine within the human person. Today is the Feast of Epiphany in the Christian tradition, and this holiday celebrates the disclosure of Jesus, peace be upon him, as the divine child to humanity following his birth by way of the arrival of the Magi in Bethlehem. For those of you who are able to join us for our Christmas holiday service, we journey together on our own spiritual route like the Magi to encounter the divine child. In the Eastern Orthodox Church, this holiday also represents divine manifestation, but at the time of the baptism of Jesus in the River Jordan. The Gospels record this event like this. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove, and a light was on him. A voice from heaven said, "This is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased." This is traditionally considered when he begins his public ministry. Now, Unitarian Universalists don't traditionally follow much of the Christian liturgical calendar outside of Christmas and Easter, so I thought it would be interesting for us to consider Epiphany and this divine child in a new light. Unitarian Universalists have often had a complex relationship with Jesus. Our spiritual ancestors were declared heretics because they denied the Trinity and instead argued for the unity of God. This was especially heretical to mainline Christians and still is this day because the Unitarian side of our tradition has never equated him with God. They also didn't believe in the doctrine of original sin or the need to be saved from the consequences of original sin. Our spiritual ancestors believed the doctrines of Trinitarianism, original sin, and substitutional atonement to be inconsistent with the life and teachings of this great religious prophet. Unitarians and Universalists tended to believe in following the way of Jesus, as the religion was originally known, instead of the organized religion that developed around his life. As a young queer person, I grew up receiving many messages from religious institutions and our culture that condemned my very existence. Many queer people in our culture had to respond to this hatred and religious trauma by abandoning organized religion altogether. Likewise, many religious liberals were subjected to religious trauma by the institutional church in this culture, and in response abandoned Jesus, Christianity, and anything that might remind them of these toxic experiences of religion. Have any of you had these experiences? And we wonder why this is problematic for so many. As a queer youth, I was a deeply spiritual person, and I found the messages of the church to be inconsistent with my direct experiences of divinity. I decided that I wanted to learn and make up my own mind about this religious leader, and decided to begin reading and attempting to interpret the Bible. What I found disturbed me and profoundly shaped the course of my life. Instead of the Jesus of popular culture, I encountered a profound spiritual teacher whose truly radical message of spiritual renewal and societal transformation has been drowned out by the institutional religion that has been built around him. Rather than someone pontificating about doctrines and creeds, I encountered someone with a spiritual life that seemed far similar to my own than the things that I had been taught by others about him. Here was a courageous young man who dared to challenge all of the religious religious orthodoxies of his day, repeatedly violating the codes of purity and working tirelessly to overthrow an oppressive religious culture in the most powerful theocratic empire of the world. Rather than teaching about a need to believe in him to be saved, he taught the religious path to the divine was one of transgression, and that all the people society condemns are, in actuality, the members of the divine kingdom. As the actor and comedian John Fugelsang sang, the son of a former nun and monk, had popularly observed, Jesus was a radical, non-violent revolutionary who hung around with lepers, hookers, and crooks. He wasn't American and didn't speak English. He was anti-wealth and anti-death penalty and anti-public prayer, right? But was not anti-gay, never mentioned birth control, never called the poor lazy, never justified torture, never fought for tax cuts for the wealthiest Nazarenes, never asked a leper for a copay, and was a long-haired, brown-skinned, homeless, community organizing, anti-slut-shaming Middle Eastern Jew. Now, after my venture into the sacred text of this tradition and my own encounters with this profound mystical teacher, I began to wonder why Unitarian Universalists didn't love this guy. I mean, it seems easy to forget that we wouldn't exist, and all of the profound transformations our spiritual ancestors cultivated in the world would not have occurred if it wasn't for his life and the spiritual teachings of love, justice, and mercy. I began to suspect that many Unitarian Universalists weren't actually having an adverse reaction to Jesus because they barely knew the guy. I thought perhaps with a more intimate encounter with Jesus, we might come to a similar conclusion to that of Mahatma Gandhi after he began studying his spiritual master more closely. He remarked, "I like your Christ. I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ." His experience of Christianity in India was informed by the brutal legacy of colonialism and religious imperialism, and he frequently reported seeing Christians disparaging his Hindu culture and beloved deities and preaching the superiority of the Christian religion. He eventually came to love Jesus and wrote, "The New Testament gave me comfort and boundless joy, as it came after the revulsion that parts of the Old Testament had given me. Today, supposing I was deprived of the Bhagavad Gita, a principal Hindu sacred text, and forgot all of its contents, but I had a copy of the Sermon on the Mount, I should derive the same joy from it as I do from the Gita." Today, many Hindus accept Jesus as a manifestation of the divine alongside their own avatars and revered spiritual gurus. Many even claim that in the lost years of Jesus, basically most of his life, from the time of his birth until he began his public ministry at the age of 33, he traveled to India and studied its religious wisdom and came to his own profound experience of self-realization through his Jewish religious identity. In my extensive study of diverse religious traditions and mysticism, or this direct encounter of the divine, it has become clear to me that the version of Jesus sold to us by the popular religious imagination is inaccurate and conceals the profound spiritual teachings of this great prophet of liberating religion. I've had many dreams, experiences, and encounters with Jesus over the years that have shaped my understanding of the spiritual path and the importance of this human being to the transformation of our society. Occasionally, I have what I call mystical dreams, in that they seem to be more real than the reality I experience when I am awake. Years ago, I had one of these most moving experiences of this prophet in a dream, and I stumbled upon it in my journals the other day. In this dream, he is in a boat teaching others the spiritual path, and I sense him in a deep communion with everything around him. He is teaching using the natural world, with metaphors of the birds traveling overhead, the gentle winds, and the shimmering sea, to impart spiritual teachings to his followers. I am so moved by this communion of nature and these deep spiritual truths that I realize I am actually floating over the sea towards him in a dream, and I am totally amazed. I am literally being drawn through the air to him, which was a really cool experience. As soon as I began reveling in the fact that he is drawing me to him in these great energies of the communion of life, I begin to sink into the sea beneath me. I realize, oh crap, I'm getting stuck in my own ego, and it is causing me to begin sinking in the water. I turn to him for help, and to my surprise, instead of helping me, he commands a great wave of water to crash into me, and it throws me into another world. I find myself transported to a lifeless forest, and I'm surrounded by signs of death. The trees around me look as though they have been cut by chainsaws, and I am filled with a sense of separation from life and this great web of being. I slowly begin to awaken from this dream, and I hear him saying, "Now go and teach the path. Now go and teach the path." Now I can assure you from personal experience that it is troubling when Jesus comes to you in a mystical dream and tells you to go teach the spiritual path. Like, what are you supposed to do with that? In Islam, the first pillar of the tradition is Unitarianism. And it holds that all of the great spiritual teachers have taught the unity of the divine as the central message of religion. Jesus, or Isa as we know him in Arabic, is embraced as the Messiah, the Word of Allah, a prophet and a messenger who brought the gospel to humanity. And it says that he will return at the summation of time. But he is not thought of as God or as the Son of God, because that would deny the unity of God. Instead, he is like the prophets and messengers before him. He came to restore the message of divine unity and the totality of its embrace. Some traditions of Hinduism go a step further than Islam and understand him to be an avatar or descent of God to humanity, very similar to the Christian understanding, but not identical. The Baha'i faith takes yet another approach and declares him to be a manifestation of the divine, alongside many other manifestations that comprise the great religious teachers of the world's religions. I think each of these are important conceptualizations of Jesus, but I somehow doubt that Jesus cares all that much about which Christological definition one accepts. But that might just be my Unitarian Universalist skepticism. Unitarian Universalism has often turned to the scriptures about Jesus that the church actually tried to destroy to learn more about him. In 1945, one of the greatest historical discoveries of this past century, the Nag Hammadi Library, was made in Upper Egypt. This library contained 13 ancient books with over 50 scriptures that the church had tried to destroy as it was standardizing and sterilizing the teachings of Jesus. It is believed that the monks had buried these texts many centuries earlier to preserve them. In this library of religious texts, we discover non-canonical, Gnostic, and mystical records that challenge many of the given assumptions of the Orthodox Church. Many people have speculated that these may have actually been the authentic teachings of the early Christian communities. Chief among these texts is the Gospel of Thomas, which records the secret teachings of Jesus, presumably those preserved for the disciples. Over the years, Thomas has been deemed the 13th apostle and the ostracized Unitarian apostle. The Gospel opens with great drama, with Jesus himself declaring, "Whoever discovers the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death. Those who seek should not stop seeking until they find. And when they find, they will be disturbed, and when they are disturbed, they will marvel, and when they marvel, they will reign over all. After they have reigned, they will rest. For many of the first will be last, and they will become a single one." These secret and heretical teachings contain 114 aphorisms and teachings that are claimed to be his direct words. Reading these teachings, one can't help but draw parallels with some of the teachings of Hinduism and Buddhism. Jesus counsels the early Christians in the Gospel of Thomas. "The Pharisees and the scholars have taken the keys of knowledge and have hidden them. They have not entered, nor have they allowed those who want to enter to do so. As for you, be as sly as snakes and as simple as doves in dealing with them." He defined his spiritual tradition in glowing, mystical terms. "I am the light beyond all things. I am all. From me all came forth, and to me all is attained. Split a piece of wood, I am there. Lift up a stone, and you will find me there." Although many of these hidden teachings reflect ones found in the canonical Gospels, this notion of the omnipresence of the Spirit of life contradicted the teachings of the Church, which insisted that the divine could only be accessed through officials and sacraments of the Church. It would take 1,500 years before the Reformation would reclaim such propositions and refute the role of organized religion as the sole arbitrator of divine encounter. After all, if you can find Jesus chopping wood or beneath a rock, this would severely dilute the power of the organized church that the organized church held on to for many centuries. In another divergence from the official narrative, Jesus saw some babies nursing. He said to his disciples, "These nursing babies are like those who will enter the realm of the divine." Traditionally, the record ends here, but in the Gospel of Thomas, the narrative continues. "They said to him, 'Then shall we enter the kingdom as babies?' Jesus responded, 'When you make the two into one, and when you make the inner like the outer, and the outer like the inner, and the upper like the lower, and when you make the male and female into a single one, so that the male will not be male, nor the female be female, then you will enter the realm of the divine." This profoundly mystical teaching of non-duality and non-binaries, mixities, and the path of divine realization may have been just too much for the institutional church of his day. "The realm of the divine is within you" is another traditional teaching found in the Orthodox Gospels. But the Gospel of Thomas once again takes this a step further with what scholars believe to be its concluding teaching. Here his disciples question him, "When will the realm of the divine arrive?" And he responds, "The divine's realm is already spread out upon the earth, and the people do not see it." Perhaps this Epiphany, we can reconsider this profound spiritual teacher and discover the divine manifest within ourselves and spread out upon the earth. Perhaps we will discover Jesus in new terms and find our own religious epiphanies. to commitment to the spiritual path, and discerning the truth. Amen, Amen, Salam, Shanti, Salom, and blessed be.